Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the eCommerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hey team, welcome to another episode of Mentoring Moments, and I've got Zach on the call with me today on one of our one-to-one mentorship calls. And Zach always comes up with a great agenda. He's always got great questions. He's got great detail, and he's always got stuff that's pretty applicable to a pretty broad audience. So I'm always grateful for that. But Zach's question really today was, how am I best to approach content creation across a multitude of platforms, but specifically to start off with LinkedIn? What does that look like? How should a post be formatted? How am I going to decide which content I should be posting? How frequently should I post? What should I put links in the post? Just the general starting off point, the jumping off point for starting his creator's journey, or restarting his creator's journey, I should say, more than anything else. And what does that look like? And how am I going to both learn, but also bring value, hopefully, to my audience at the same time? Because content is a journey of exploration for the creator first and foremost, and then it's kind of for the audience second most. Because and what I said to you, Zach, was, look, if you don't love this, if you don't like the topics that you're talking about, and you don't like the formats that you're creating in, and you don't like the platforms you're distributing to, you probably won't stick with it because you'll hate it, and it'll feel like a job. It'll feel like a chore as opposed to something you look forward to doing. And you actually have to look forward to doing it to stick with it. And I use the analogy of my podcast, where I just feel so privileged and lucky and excited to jump on an hour call with somebody that I respect and I like and I trust from the industry, that an hour races by, and by the end of it, I wish we'd had another 2 hours to continue our conversation. And so I just feel super lucky when I'm able to create that kind of content with somebody. And it's the same with the topics that I talk about on LinkedIn. I really just try to talk about the things that amp me up, that get me pumped. Occasionally, I'll have to just mail it in by talking about something that's in the news because I have to address it because it's such a big deal. And I may not love talking about that topic, but I would say greater than 90% of the time, I'm creating content that I love. And that's kind of where we started the discussion. And I'd love for you to sort of give your take and your reinterpretation of what we discussed.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So really great session. Really appreciate your time and kind of having a look and giving such great and precise feedback. Tackling LinkedIn is its own thing. I mean, you can be a great writer, but if you're not meeting LinkedIn's format and algorithms and that sort of stuff, it's not going to hit as well. So some of the main takeaways is really splitting that content up, making it really nice and digestible, making it 2 sentences per post or like per paragraph sort of thing, not giving a wall of text, turning a large post into a series instead, just because it's a lot more digestible. Little hacks like putting your links into the comments, stuff like that, things that I wouldn't guess, like how does LinkedIn play the game and how do you kind of play to their rules. And then another piece of like advice that kind of helps with my writing itself that I'm going to be using a lot is the writing for a 13-year-old. Didn't really think about it at first, but we're not writing to 5-year-olds here. Like, that's great when you're explaining stuff to maybe a new joiner in the company or something like that, but a LinkedIn audience is pretty educated and you can't dumb stuff down too much. So like a 13-year-old gives you some complexity, some flexibility. It's a lot less pressure, and you'll be rewriting the same idea a lot less. But no, those are definitely some of my takeaways there. But also, it was very reassuring, like we said, the volume game, like enjoying what you're writing. And like we discussed, I've got my own creative outlets that I can kind of map that same framework to, where a lot of getting better is just going to be about putting out a volume and just watching that progress over time, getting like a feedback loop going, because there's no better feedback than from your customers, which really is LinkedIn users, right? In this case, my customers will be my connections, people on the platform, that sort of thing. So seeing what posts resonate directly is just the best way to kind of understand, am I writing properly? So yeah, no, really great session. Appreciate your time, Jason.
My absolute pleasure. And the one final thing I'll leave you with that I didn't mention before is no feedback is feedback. Meaning, if you get no likes, no comments, no nothing, and you look back after 2 or 3 days, and LinkedIn will tell you how many impressions a post got, like how many views it got. And if if you're not getting 1% or 2% engagement rate based on those impressions, then that's also feedback. It means you either need to make it simpler, you need to make the post shorter, or you need to create maybe a slightly more engaging opening sentence hook. Or I just think that a lot of people, they go, oh, God, I put 20 minutes in, or half an hour into writing this awesome post that I think is a really good post with really great information. And they get zero feedback, they get zero likes, they get zero comments. They might even have 1,000 followers and they get zero interaction with their post. I say that is amazing feedback. That is exactly the kind of feedback you're looking for. Like that, like a level of polarization is awesome. Like, if you got just like maybe 2 likes and 2 comments, then you kind of go, well, shit, that's kind of a bit lukewarm. If you get none, okay, I need to completely revisit how I speak on this platform. If you if you hit it out of the park and you get, if with only 1,000 followers, you get 10 likes and 10 or 20 comments, well, shit, that's a home run post with a small community, right? And so I think that any kind of polarizing response that you get, or if you incite a little bit of hatred in some of the responses that you get, which I don't encourage people to play that game and try to intentionally create clickbait posts. But I'm also in favor of people having a strong opinion on a subject that they're passionate about, and being really willing to put their name on the line and say, this is my strong opinion based on my experiences and based on what I've learned. And if that creates a level of friction that causes people to want to interact with that post, well, then that's still a win as far as I'm concerned. So like I self-censor a little bit, because there's certain things that you just cannot talk about on social platforms, COVID being one of them, and a few other topics. You literally just can't. It's very, you will get banned if you say some of the things that I would love to say about certain political topics, for example. You just can't talk about those things. They'll just ban you. So like I do self-censor a little bit, but within the confines of the topics that I know I'm able to talk about on LinkedIn with impunity, I will tell the absolute, blunt truth about my take on that topic. And that oftentimes ends up being, by definition, a little bit polarizing. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think if you stick to your guns and you say, well, this is my take because X, Y, Z, and you justify it, then I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with stirring the pot a little bit, as long as it's genuine. Andrew, you were talking about some good stuff this week that I think will be helpful. And so I'm going to let you lead off.
Absolutely. So as Jason, e-commerce business that sells socks, we currently manufacture exclusively in Turkey, but that leaves us open to a variety of risks, geopolitical, cost, that type of thing. And we're starting to get to a place now where we're at about £500,000 in revenue, where we need to diversify out and also think about reducing our costs. It's our number one biggest cost we've got at the moment, our cost of goods sold. And so we're actually looking for new suppliers. We went out to the market. China came back. There's actually a place in China called Sock City. They do about 40% of the world's socks. And so we went out to them, a couple of people came back with some really good offers, and they've actually come back with offers that are almost like 40% of what we pay at the moment, 50% of what we pay at the moment, which is straight down to the bottom line, straight to help us save more animals, which is what we're about. But I'm struggling to connect up the level of quality which we have of a product, which we want to continue to be really high, but marry it up with a slightly reduced cost. And how do I communicate that to a Chinese manufacturer where I'm saying, look, I want that super high quality, but I also still need a better price, but I'm willing to nudge on the price. So I thought you had some good comments there, Jason.
Yeah, look, and I think this is a challenge that a lot of particularly fashion manufacturers go through as they're starting to scale. They're going, okay, we're now needing higher volumes. We need to try to bring our input costs down to where we can make a better margin, allow for shipping costs, because we know logistics costs internationally are just going through the roof. So we've got to save costs somewhere if we can. And so you're certainly not alone in trying to achieve COGS savings across the entire product development lifecycle. So that's the first thing. Second of all, I've done a lot of business with China over the years. And so what I suggested to you was, First of all, you have to understand the cultural psychology of businesses in China is different to a lot of other fashion manufacturing hubs like Indonesia, like Vietnam, like Mexico. You have these manufacturing hubs of fashion all around the world, mostly in smaller, less developed countries for the obvious reasons that labor is cheaper. But in each of these major manufacturing hubs, as you will know from your experiences in Turkey, they've all got cultural differences too. And it doesn't just extend to the quality of the product or how they make the product, but it even extends into how you negotiate with them, how you do business with them, how you create your trading terms with them, how you ensure that you are going to maintain a certain standard of quality for your product over time, to where they don't just say, look, this is a locked in customer of ours, so we can let the quality slack over a period of time. So I think that there's a level of accountability that has to go along with any partner relationship like this. And there was a few different specific tips that I gave you in regards to doing business with China. And look, my wife's Asian and she's Chinese. And so, look, I understand the Asian cultures very well. I have a lot of very close Asian friends. I've done a lot of business with China over the years. And there's a few things that I've learned that hopefully will help you. And that the first thing is that almost every single manufacturing factory in China will have a grading system for their product. And so they will already have, they might call it something else, but for lack of a better term, a grade 1, a grade 2, and a grade 3 product, right? And they will say, what do you want? Do you want a grade 1 product, which is the top grade we manufacture, but it's the most expensive? Do you want a grade 2 product? Here's the concessions you make at grade 2. Maybe it's a synthetic material versus a natural material, or maybe it's a different thread count, or maybe it's a different weave, or maybe it's a different, maybe when we're thinking about dyes, for example, maybe sometimes there's a natural dye versus a synthetic dye. So there's all sorts of different inputs into their own product that they will classify their own product. They'll say, do you want a grade 1? Do you want a grade 2? Or do you want a grade 3? If you send them your product, which I assume you will need to do or already have done, the best way to approach this is if you've got an existing, so if you didn't have a product, this would be a different story, because you would need to try to classify and you would need to try to match up where you're trying to enter the market with one of their grades. But because you've already got a product and you've already got a standard that you want to maintain, that makes it a little bit easier. You can send them the product and you can say, okay, here's the standard that we need to maintain. We need to be at this level or better if we're going to manufacture through you. What is the cost to do? Or again, you can get their standards back from them and say, would one of these 3 standards that they've already got work for us? Is this of a standard we can accept? And what is the price associated with that tier of product? And so I think that's the first thing. Second thing, when you are dealing with Chinese, especially the first time, it is always better to have some level of boots on the ground in China doing these negotiations in their language, in Mandarin or in Cantonese if they're a Cantonese manufacturer. Usually it's better to pay a broker or it's better to pay a facilitator. There's facilitators in China that will go to the factory. They will have the conversations on your base. So you're paying them. You're paying them as your representative in China, liaising with these factories, right? They go and they do the negotiations. They have the discussion with them. They understand what the tiering is. They understand what the pricing impacts will be. Then they communicate those back to you in English. And then usually for the first 2, 3, 4 shipments, they will go to the factory before it gets dispatched to you, because you don't want a pallet of socks to turn up. And then you go, geez, this is not, what am I going to do now? Am I going to return these back to China for a refund? Am I going to throw them away? Am I going to find, so you could be out of pocket on a single shipment. You could be out of pocket a significant amount of money to pay a premium for that initial negotiation and to pay a premium for those first 2, 3, 4 shipments to make sure that they go without a hitch and that the quality is exactly the standard that you've agreed to. It's a no-brainer to do that, right? And I also mentioned the final thing, which is that when we start thinking about commercial negotiations with Chinese, they don't mind you getting straight down to business. They don't get hung up on a lot of niceties and building an interpersonal relationship before you start asking about commercials and costs and grades and things like that. They're quite happy for you to send an email, hello, Mr. Such and such, you need to get a price on this, blah, 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 blah. And you just get straight down to business. That culturally, that is very acceptable to start negotiating almost straight out of the gate. Indonesia, totally different. Vietnam, totally different. Mexico, totally different. they expect you to have a little bit more of a relationship. They expect you to ask about family and how are you doing, and they expect to have a little bit more of a personal relationship with you that goes along with the business relationship. And so you have to approach those markets differently as a result. If you want to build a fruitful partnership with those suppliers, you have to, and I use the example of Mexico. There is a lot more niceties that go on in conversation here. It's a lot more flowery because it's a Latin culture. It's a little bit more passionate. It's a little bit more romantic. You would never just message someone and say, "Hey, need a price for you to take me from the airport to this tourist destination." That you would never do that. You would always say something like, "Good day, sir. How you doing? Got your information. I was recommended to talk to you by this person, so that's why I'm reaching out. Would love to see if we can work together on XYZ." So there's a lot more fluff, for lack of a better term, in those conversations, so that you're not perceived as rude, so that you're not perceived as cold, so that you're not perceived as all business, right? So in every market in which you operate, not only from a customer perspective will it be different, but from a supplier perspective, it will be different. And we have to take those into account when we're dealing with those markets.
Yeah, massively. Thanks. It's so helpful, Jason. We're going to, I think, really change a few things. I'm going to go back to them on the gradings. I'm going to see if we can get almost like a buyer's advocate in China. And then I could just push maybe more specifically on the quality. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Hey, everybody. I'm on one of my one-to-one mentorship calls with Megan, and we were talking about some things. She had some awesome stuff on her agenda, especially with the whole retail world and getting ready, getting geared up for the whole Cyber Weekend, Black Friday, Cyber Monday holiday period, combined with the lead in to Christmas. Almost every brand is already starting to do their holiday planning, or right now they're already starting to do their forecasting, not only for the end of this year for Q4, but they're also starting to do their planning for not only Q1 of 2024, but they're also starting to do their full year planning and their targets, setting their targets for the full year of 2024. And one of the things you were talking about is, okay, what should we be focusing on through Cyber Weekend to make sure that we're getting the most out of what is already a huge online shopping period for the world? How do we get the most value out of it as a brand? And some of the things we talked about were, okay, you're very likely to be courting and securing much more price sensitive customers, not exclusively, but you have bargain hunters that come out of the woodwork that may only buy online literally during Cyber Weekend. They wait all year for Cyber Weekend. They save up their wish list for Cyber Weekend. And not only that, but they do their holiday shopping on Cyber Weekend at the same time, because they're like, man, okay, there's no guarantee I'm going to get this pre-Christmas sale that I want. So I'm going to do my shopping over Cyber Weekend. I'm going to knock all my holiday shopping on the head all in one fell swoop. I'm going to buy all the stuff I want for me, and I'm going to buy all the stuff I want for my family all at the same time, and I'm going to get it at a great deal. We pull forward sales from Christmas period into Cyber Weekend. That's a very common result. Secondarily, we're oftentimes securing bargain basement customers. So what do we do given that scenario and given that setup? What I recommended was we need to start thinking about what is not only our existing AOV, meaning our average order value, but what is our existing average unit value? Because, okay, maybe our AOV is going to go down slightly because we're discounting, because we're doing promotions, because we're doing unique bundles and kits, because we're doing things that we wouldn't normally do. Our AOV is probably going to take a hit, but our unit sales should improve on a per order basis. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put things together that because it is not guaranteed that any of these customers will be loyal customers in the end, if they're bargain hunting customers. What we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize the value of that first time purchase instead. So our strategy shifts during these sale periods. And it's how can we sell more the first time around to these customers, because we may never see them again, combined with what does our data collection and extraction and cohort strategy look like during this time? Because what's also going to happen is that these customers that you secure during this time, they're going to taint your data. They're going to pollute your data because they're such a unique, or they can be such a unique cohort of customers. You have to really think about how do we segment them into their kind of own unique bucket so that we segment them out of our normal cohort tracking. So we want to, it's like I always say, as an employee, you learn or you earn. With customers, it's the same. We either want to learn from them or we want to earn from them, ideally both. So we want to have really solid zero and first party data planning, data collection planning for this period, because you're going to get much more data volumetrically than you normally would, but you have to take into account the type of customer you're likely to be getting during this time. You want to extract more value out of first time purchase during this time. Plus, I also suggested that you actually start, like, because you're probably going to have some packages that are really targeted at that Christmas buyer. Sure, you may cannibalize some of those Christmas sales during Cyber Weekend, but that's okay. I think that's okay, because if you put your Christmas bundles, your Christmas packages, however it is you're going to do it, maybe the gift wrap, whatever it is, if you put those products up for sale during Cyber Weekend and beyond, what it's going to do is, even if those customers don't buy right then and there for their holiday sales, they're at least going to know that you've got them, that you're going to have these special packages and bundles that are really for gifting, that they know you're going to have that. And so even if they don't buy right then and there, they will likely come back to you and say, okay, I know these guys have got gifting bundles. I'm going to come back and I'm going to make my Christmas purchase here as a result. So I think that really our entire strategy, our normal year-round strategy, has to change quite dramatically during holiday periods to take advantage of as many opportunities as we can. And we want to minimize the straight discount mentality. We want to say, okay, if you want a discount from us, basically you're going to have to stretch and you're going to have to buy more things in the form of a bundle or a kit or whatever it might be to get that, or to get the free shipping, or to get these things. You got to give to get, right? And so what we want to do is we want to increase our unit sales, ideally increase AOV, but it's unlikely. Most brands do not increase their AOV during holiday sale periods. They just don't. Their AOVs usually go down. So what we want to do is we at least want to increase our unit sales. So did that all kind of resonate with some of the things you were already thinking anyway?
Yeah, for sure. For the first time this year, we are offering things like in-cart offers as well. We're also free exclusive post-purchase offers on the post-purchase page. So we're going to be testing a range of different initiatives that we never had previously. So I have all fingers crossed that this year we'll be able to utilize more tactics to increase this year. So fingers crossed.
Fantastic. And I think one of the other things we discussed was, how do we try to bring some reality to our forecasting? So a lot of brands, they'll have maybe the boss, the leader, the CEO, whatever it is, just throw the gauntlet down and say, next year we're going to try to grow 50%. And now it's your job to figure out how, right? From a revenue perspective, or maybe from a margin perspective, or whatever it is. And so what I suggested to you was, look, we need to take some responsibility and accountability as e-commerce managers, as e-commerce leaders. We need to take some responsibility for making sure that any forecasting, any targets, any planning is grounded in some sort of sense of reality, given that the macro conditions in 2024 are slated to deteriorate versus 2023 intentionally. Central banks are already telegraphing higher for longer interest rates because inflation has been higher for longer than perhaps what they thought it might be. And so they're trying to engineer a crash. They're trying to engineer what they say is a soft landing, but when has that ever happened? So usually they go too far one way and then they go too far the other way. So it's like a massive pendulum, right? When they go to zero interest rate policy, the economy booms like it did from 2008 to 2021. And then now the party's over, they've taken the punch bowl away and we've all got to take our medicine. So the reality is they're all going to try to raise interest rates here in Mexico, are 11.25%. The Fed, in its announcement this week, has already said interest rates are going to be higher for longer to try to get a handle on inflation. When the U.S. gets a sniffle, the whole entire world gets cold. That's the reality. That's the way it's always been. That's probably the way it'll always be. So the reality is the macro trend is not looking fantastic for 24, but you can only control what you can control. And people said that same thing about 2023. They said the recession was going to come in 2023. It didn't. And so most brands, and I think you yourself included, you probably did better in 2023 than you thought you were going to do. So does that mean you're going to also do better than you thought you were going to do in 2024? Maybe. But how do we start to create some realistic kind of range that we think we're working in so that we can then create stretch targets that are genuine stretch targets that we can communicate to the business? Okay, this is a stretch. We may not hit it. We're going to do our best, but this is going to be a stretch. What I recommended is to take at least COVID really threw out the playbook around trending, but luckily we've now got 2023 as a cleaner sort of set of data points to work with, because we're a little bit more back to normal for the majority of 2023. So the trends in 2023 are probably going to be a lot more accurate than the trends from 21, 22, right? Which were just off the charts, ridiculous. Where I would start if I was in your shoes is with the sales trend, because you'll have peaks and troughs over the whole of 2023. You'll have high months, you'll have low months. And what I said was, we want to chart this. So we want to draw a trend line across the peaks of the top, and that'll go up like this. We want to draw a trend line underneath the troughs at the bottom. That'll go up. And what's going to happen is, if you were up in aggregate for the year, the trend channel at the end of that, if you were to extend that out beyond the end of 2023, following that trend line and just extending it out for another 12 months on the top and just extending it out for another 12 months along the bottom in a forecast model way, you're going to end up with a channel that looks something like that. So the bottom is up, but maybe not at the same rate as the top. It's going to be up like that. The top is going to be up like that because that's your peaks. And so that's going to make a channel. That's going to form a channel. And this end down here between the ends of the channel at the end of 12 months, that's your range. Worst case scenario, hopefully you don't drop below the lowest point on the channel. Hopefully you end up near the top end of the channel, but that's probably an ambitious thing, because that's probably going to be your stretch. Most likely you're going to fall somewhere in the middle of that channel, right? Somewhere smack in the middle of that is reality, right? At least if we can go back to the business and we can say, we've done our modeling, we've stretched that out, those trend lines, we've created the trend line channel, and this is where we think we're likely to hit. But I said, create a worst case scenario model, create a best case scenario model, and then create a likely scenario model. Okay, what does that look like to us as a business? If we do poorly, what does it do to our need to hold certain amounts of stock, to do certain amounts of manufacturing, to what would that do to our staff numbers? What would that all look like in the business if we end up at the bottom? Conversely, what does that do to the business if we end up at the top? How much more product do we need to make? How often do we need to relook at the trends mid-year so that we can make sure that we have enough stock if we hit those top level numbers? And we revisit the trend every month along the way just to see where we're tracking versus that channel. And then what happens if we fall in the middle? What does that look like for us? If we think we're on track to fall in the middle, okay, do we need to look at adding a marketing channel, say, for example? If we need to move the lever in a big way, how would we go about doing that? And what are the resources and what are the ROI we're likely to get on that if we end at the top of the trend line, right? So those are some of the ideas that I gave to you to try to bring some reality to the discussion around forecasting and targets. Did that all make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I've not done that type of forecasting before. Typically, I've looked month on month at patterns. So doing it that way, I think, is a really great way for us to plan worst case and best case scenarios, because forecasting is like doing this. We would all love to have a crystal ball in e-commerce. So I think going into 2024 with the mindset of we have a plan regardless of whether it's best or worst case, it takes the stress off those of us in e-commerce. So it's a really great way to reframe it and to look at it differently than maybe we've done previously.
And it, I think, also brings a reality check to the leadership in the business, the senior leadership, either the owners or the C-suite team or whatever. Oftentimes now you guys luckily aren't a public company, so it's not like you've got shareholders that you need to keep happy and try to bring insane value to and insane growth metrics to. But you have a founder that you answer to. And so sometimes founders get a little crazy with their hopes and dreams and aspirations for their own businesses, which makes sense. But I think if it really shows that you are a data-driven trader, so your numbers, and you've done the homework to say, these are what I think is the range that we're likely to fall within because of XYZ reason. Here's what we're going to do. Here's our plan to try to move it more towards the top level of the channel than the bottom level of the channel. but it helps to reset expectations even for the leadership in terms of where you're likely to land within the context of the macro economy. Again, I think that people get caught up too much in things they cannot control, but what you can control is what you guys are likely to do within the context of what you did, right? If the world melts and you end up below the bottom trend line, you probably got bigger things to worry about than just your business, right? So I think we throw the outlier black swan event type scenarios, the whole massive recession or depression type scenario. I think we throw that out the window. I think we throw a COVID bump possibility out the window. America's making noises again about COVID coming back and potentially closing their borders and all those sorts of crazy things. Sure, that would be considered a black swan event from my perspective. And that would be a black swan event to the upside because everybody would be at home again. And all of a sudden, everybody would go, woohoo, I got to buy online again. So I think that's a black swan event to the upside. I think a depression or a massive recession is a black swan event to the downside. Those are outside of our control. Those are things we can't really plan for. So let's not even try. Let's plan for the highly likely scenario that things are going to continue on the trend of 2023 or somewhere in the middle. Cool. Megan, it's been a fantastic opportunity to chat with you, and we'll speak again in another couple of weeks. So I always appreciate you coming with some good stuff to chat about. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.